Hi Josephine, hope you're alright. So look, I kind of sometimes like to just speak because I don't always think that you can convey it in words. And also I just like feel like I got to say something. So like, I do this quite a lot on groups, various groups, whether it's Stonehenge groups or that Irish megalithic research groups or even our local groups or whatever. So it's just what I do. Like if I want to, I feel like I want to speak. So yeah, I mean, this is really interesting, that CataCombes, because if you think of combing, right, like, combing, a comb, but also if you look at the word cat, I thought the word cat, because we use it for like a kitten, or like an animal, I thought it was some sort of Roman word, but it turns out it's Germanic. And they're saying, I've just put you this here, look at this, cat, Old English cat, cattle, origin, related to Dutch cat, cate, is reinforced by Middle English. So it's got a Germanic origin for cattle. So how would you get the word cat short for all the tigers and so forth? Well, I think that there's definitely some sort of connection between sort of combing, and combing. And when you get to cat, why would you name a animal like a cat something to do with anything to do with cattle? Well, I'm kind of thinking of like, if I was going to name a cat for something that it did, other than the fact it's a carnivore, the cats have special claws, that they retract and pull in and out. That is the distinct thing that makes cats, felines, different. Because, like all bears and rodents and all the other different size, kind of like, dogs and canine up to bears, which are basically essentially kind of like, adaptations of the same sort of like base animal that has just got variations and size changes. Like a cheetah is the only cat that can't retract its claws, which is kind of the most related to a dog out of all the cats, apparently. So yeah, those claws, they like to. The thing is, right? They enjoy raking. You get like a pleasure from raking, and the cats kind of like play with mice, but they use the claws to hunt and catch things. And I think that the thing is, you can get a pleasure out of claws. I know some women like to have long nails, like, and you can. Some people like to. Like if you like to pick at, some people like to pick at scabs or whatever, there's some sort of pleasure in it, or you can have human pleasure center linked to clawing things under certain circumstances, where you can actually get a pleasure from scraping and clawing. But also it can go on to the bad side as well, like, if you get like angry, like in a rage or angry, and I think that's where like the carnivores kind of carnal sort of like the carnal sort of primal scream kind of sort of the kind of just the unrestrained kind of basically like primal scream, really. It's kind of like so. But the thing with the cattle, when you bring the cattle into it and combing, then it's like bringing farming, isn't it? Because like if you've got cattle combing, cattle are pulling ploughs. So you've got cattle are actually combing, and the word cat for cattle, but also combing is the same as a claw for a tiger. Now the thing is, right, and I mean, I'm not like absolute geek going in like groups all the time, but I think I'll probably post this on the Irish Megalithic Research group because it's a really good group, although there are two groups like that, and I've been doing a lot of study on our ancient sites around here, but I'm also quite interested in Stonehenge and Howard Crowhurst's videos and all stuff like that as well. But there's a lot of stuff going on at the moment. The thing is, right, that if you are ploughing, right? If you're ploughing fields, which is what we do, when you're removing forests and then creating ploughs to plough fields and spread farming, right? The thing is, the problem with all these ancient sites and all these, like the fairy rings and the circles and the ancient stones and, even Newgrange, all of, there's not a lot of them left because they all got ploughed out. And some of them are protected, but we know that a lot of them got ploughed out, and that's why they do a lot of these aerial scans to try and find them. But also we know that there was a lot of burial mounds. Some of them are still unopened in Ireland. There's a lot of burial mounds that actually are still unopened, and they've still got the remains of the ancestors inside them. I mean, a lot of them, some of them in through from Cambridgeshire up to Lincolnshire and so forth, had people buried. They've got a warrior with a chariot, and they've got the horses, and then they lowered them into they buried them on the chariot, in the chariot, actually with the horses pulling the chariot. So you've got all that as well. That's extremely interesting, particularly when you're farming and uncovering all these things, when you're ploughing and digging up stuff, and also destroying and devastating things as well. All they say archaeology is destructive. But the thing is, the Romans' main mission was to erase and remove the administration of the Druids and their religious order, and the whole use of the religious sacraments and the communion kind of in the temples with the religious experience, which is basically it's kind of rebirth experience, like a recalibration rebirth experience, like this, all the bright colours and body painting and the whole kind of tripping and dreaming kind of aspect to it, meeting the ancestors and so forth, inner journeys, and which is something that there's a lot of debate and dispute over, because there aren't any records of it other than either if you try it out yourself, or there just there aren't many records from ancient writers about it, unless you explore the subject experientially yourself. And then there's a lot of dispute between the Irish and because of Christianity, basically. But Christianity really wanted to erase all of the pagan religion and culture. And a lot of the ancestors, in Ireland, a lot of these, what is valuable is the actual remains of the ancestors. We know for certain that, after Oliver Cromwell died and after the royals came back in, they dug his bones up and dragged them around on a cart. They pulled his bones around just for humiliation, because they hated him so much with a vengeance. That's to the lengths that they will go. At the moment, I've been doing a lot of work on our ancient sites here in West Yorkshire, and I've definitely found that we've had ancient heritage sites attacked and spoiled as near as 1954. And when Varley started excavating Castle Hill, World War II broke out, and then after the war, when it was the Queen's coronation in the 1950s, 1954, they built on top of our other ancient site, and it never got officially excavated or examined. It's kind of blocked it. And then they banged the Imperial Chemical Industries next to it as well to spoil it. And King George was seen opening that, signing in book. I've got a lot of evidence for. You see, the thing is, when it comes to, gold is meant to be valuable. Like everyone says, oh, gold's, gold and diamonds and things like that. But these people preserve the ancestors, and the remains of the ancestors is the only thing you've got left of them to know they existed. I think preserving them in those burials were almost like a time capsule, because how would they know where they came from and how they got there unless they had some sort of memory, So memory was important to them, and preservation. I'm not a great fan of this cremation model, because when you do cremations, there's not much left, although it's interesting that, breaking down molecules back to essentially powder is almost like throwing it to the river or to the wind, and casting yourself back into the recycling yourself into the molecules of existence is one thing, but if you actually think of the burials as memory, because this is the thing, if we didn't have any skeleton, if every single skeleton was cremated, you wouldn't know anything. The only reason that these scientists and archaeologists are making all these discoveries about, all the different humans that they were in between and, what the adaptations were, is because of the finding the remains, right? So it's got to be important that, and the Egyptians went a step further and even tried to, mummified them to maximum preservation and so forth. So people say that, these diamonds and jewels and so forth are extremely valuable, but there's nothing more precious than ancestors themselves, because, there are a lot of humans on this planet, but, if it's a certain person or a certain person in history who's done something or anything like that, surely every single human is unique. Whereas, I know every single diamond is slightly different and so forth, but I think, the remains of humans are undervalued when it comes to archaeology, and, they're more interested in finding, some golden talk or some, gems or trinkets or whatever. But, the people are important. And the thing is, this is the most controversial thing out of all of it, really. Like the royal family have got special departments and divisions, in pedigree and heritage and, ancestry and coat of arms and heraldry and so forth. They've got, special, king of the arms and so forth. And they really underplay it all. They underplay everything, and the whole Domesday, when they came over taking record of everything, all the ploughs and taking record of all the, animals and people's things and devaluing it. When from the conquest from 1066, when they, basically conquered us and, gradually took over, they aren't from this island. And the thing is, when you establish a government or take over a government and establish a lineage and establish, a royal family, and you have all this, next in line to the thrones and all this stuff, you're very, territorial over, if you think about it, all of the celebrations that we have now, there is a statue of Boadicea in London, true, but the majority of the figures, I know there's a statue of Alfred as well, King Alfred. But all of the knights, if you go into churches, if you go into, all these different places around England, all of the knights and the celebrated people, the majority of them are ones that are either sort of affiliated with or with allegiance to, in some way rewarded or honoured by the current, establishment and government. There are only, I think Oliver Cromwell has got a few statues. There's one in Warrington, I know, and I think there will be one in Huntingdon, where he's from, I think. But they did dig his bones up. His actual proper grave isn't there. His actual real grave, the real Oliver Cromwell, got massacred. You'd have thought that the actual real Cromwell buried would have been the value, not, some piece of concrete somewhere. So with all that, and if I've kind of gone out of the way a bit to sort of go around the houses with it. So coming back to the catacombs, I'm starting to think now if it's something to do with, this ploughing the land, but also what happens is, a lot of the ancient sites get ploughed up and a lot of the ancient sites get devastated, but also they do find things but a lot of, so, but why, raking? So we've got this like cattle and raking, but also if you think of the other side of it as well, hunting, kind of like this lion, tiger, primal kind of hunting that wild cats do. So you've got this kind of like farming the land and raking, but then you've also got this kind of hunting, kind of like cat's claw side of it, raking as well. Now, I think that is very, very, very relevant to when you've got the priests and they say, let us pray. Because when they say, let us pray, there are two ways of spelling it, but you've got pray, let us pray on animals, let us hunt, like, fire a bow at a deer, let us hunt, let us prey on the animals, animals prey on each other. But they also use that word to mean the exact opposite, let us pray. Let us pray, let us say our prayers, let us put our hands together and, make a prayer. But it depends what you're praying for at the end of the day. You can wish for a lot of things, can't you? You can wish for good things or bad things. It can go both ways. The thing is with a prayer is usually it's used in church, in ceremony. It's used in religious. It's meant to be positive, good, either, praying for someone to be saved or praying for good things or whatever. But, we don't know if some people, put their hands together and pray for, things that aren't too nice happening. So, but there's an irony in the fact that, like archaeologists say that, we can't help it. Archaeology is destructive in nature. We have to be destructive, in order to learn new things and find things. We have to pull things to pieces and destroy them, which I don't think that's necessarily true. I think they made a bit of a mess of Newgrange. I'm not a great many people aren't a great fan of Newgrange, like of the like modern frontage of it and so forth. So you've got this kind of irony with the ploughing and raking that it could be required or necessary, for farming. But then when you're digging through the burials, through the buried mounds and ancestors and digging things up, you're finding things, but they're meant to be left alone. They're meant to be preserved so you can, they're meant to be preserved as a time capsule, but, for us to find or for someone, maybe not us, maybe forever, I don't know. But, but the twist on it is that if you are, the thing with, this is highly controversial, by the way, I'm just like hypotheticalizing. So, like, if this is a big if you are a ruling elite class, and if you have got your own ancestry and family heritage and so forth, and it's not from this country, the thing is, if you start finding things that, are, from people who were there before, and people who were there before, and you've got, burials and remains of people or things, that could prove that other persons are in charge or could, be related to those people who, like, buried rulers of the past, you start getting into the area of claims, I claim that, this is mine or this is someone else's or whatever, and that's a threat to the people who come over and who conquer you. They don't like it, but I don't think that they like to admit that, and there's some kind of hidden pleasure, maybe a pleasure in the fact that it's getting raked and destroyed. There may be some secret pleasure or some secret kind of like, basically about, their enemies or their conquered being decimated. Although, people like learning and history and archaeology, but the thing is, a lot of it is... what I found is, there's a channel called Merriman Research and various other channels, and they found that, when the Christians spread, into Ireland, they were really trying to change the spelling of the names and get people to drop the names or change them, and they didn't want people to learn about their religion and heritage and so forth. So there's been a lot of censorship, and a very, very good example of a word that I like to use for this whole thing is the word brigand, because you've got the Brigantes, right, which were meant to be the Celtic tribe at the time of the Roman conquest that were in Yorkshire, in our area, or the actual, we don't know what they called themselves, but this is what the Romans called them, the Brigantes, right? And that word has ended up being used, in brigand. And it's used for robbers, for criminals, for thieves, brigands, people in the woods who will attack you, almost like Robin Hood and Little John, the thieves in the forest. Whereas and it really kind of it really is a bit it's kind of a little bit condescending towards the entire history of the Celts of the area, really, to reduce them to brigands from being this mighty kind of like Brigantes empire. So in that vein of, a word what is meant to refer to what was a prestigious clan, extensive prestigious clan, Queen Catacombes, and this Vesuvius guy, I think he was called. But then it ends up being a word that is used to describe thieves and criminals, brigands, rough people, wild people, rough people who might attack you. So, when it was the Roman army who came over and, used force to conquer us all. So, and then, I've from that, I've noticed that there's a lot of perversion of the course of meaning in language. To the extent that, the word, like, in Ireland, you've got the, like, O'Neills, O'Donohues, O'Callys, and, O'Matthews, all these clans that and the Macs and so forth. But another perversion of that is that now they use the term naught, the zero, the naught, the zero for naughty, They use it if you've been bad. If you've been bad, they say you're naughty, you're bad, which is, something that's you're wrong, or there's something wrong with you, or you're not behaving, naughty. That's another attack against the Celtic culture with the language. There's a channel called Cambrian Chronicles. Really like it. It's a good channel. He makes like really extensive videos about mainly about Wales, but mainly about kind of like ancient Celtic Britain and the Welsh language, and like the period kind of after the Romans have gone. I think mainly is when a lot of the writing was done, because they'd learned Latin at that stage. Basically, when the Celts learned to write and they put all the history in writing, that's the only connection we've got to it. So, this catacombs, it's being used for burial. I think burials under the earth. But the thing is, the word catacombs is to comb them. So it's actually, is that to make and create them, or is that to dig them up and destroy them? And is there could someone be getting some pleasure out of it when they're getting destroyed and ruined? Is interesting. Or is it just this is probably going a bit off subject now. I'll admit that with this. But, in Anglesey, in one of the chambers, in the ancient temple chambers, they found remains of a meal of like eel, frogs, snails, things like that. They were eating small animals. And, eels are, apparently, I've read that they're meant to be quite tasty fish, and you get a lot of oils from them. And, I actually have been experimenting getting some tin snails, and I really like them. They're like cockles and mussels, but rather than slightly fishy flavour, they've got an earthy flavour. I think they're healthy, and they've kind of faded all those things out that don't have fats on them or sugars, and it would be a perfect small tasty protein meal. Even frogs, the French still have them. They say it's a French thing, but it's not a French thing. This was like what the Celts ate. And the whole thing with the Irish potato famine and all that, they weaned us off all the good, healthy protein food. And, the Anglo-Saxon kings, Cambridge University, found out that they had a primarily vegetarian diet. We know that we're meant to eat more greens. Whenever I eat a lot of spinach, for long periods, like months, my skin always gets really healthy. And I look very vibrant as well. And, I'm not a great fan of this farming culture that's come over. It's definitely started in the Mediterranean. We know that for sure in the East. And, from the whole poppy farming and making bread and the windmills and so forth, this farming, we never needed farming. There's absolutely no necessity for it at all, because eels and fish and snails and frogs and things like that, which are actually really, really good sources of protein, and they're only small animals, they're actually very, very healthy and plentiful. You would not run out of them. And plants, you can grow as many plants as you want. But the thing is, it's true that, if you want to grow more plants and you want to organise your plants like in allotments, you eventually end up, doing fields at a time rather than having just allotments, because you want to get, a large number. But when you start going on to just like one thing, like, just sweet corn or just corn or just potatoes, that's when you start going wrong and you start ending up, forgetting or leaving the other things behind, and then when it's just easier to have one pig and it feeds more people. Whereas, there's an intelligence in the diet of the Druids and the ancestors that they were eating intelligent meals, which what we would actually probably benefit from eating now. We would really benefit from eating these smaller animals and vegetable diet and not having to kill, all these large amount, bigger animals, larger animals like, cows and sheep and little lambs and things like that. So, the catacombs has definitely got something to do with when you convert areas into farmland and there are things like, tombs and things that you dig up. But what about when you've got, important burials or important ancient sites? Do you want to preserve them? Or do you just say, scrap it, forget about it? And do they take all the stone and use it to build something else? This is the thing. Very, very few are left now compared to what they were. So, there's something in that. I am at the moment now under the impression that the establishment as it is only likes archaeology and learning history for the sake of knowledge for its own benefit and it's to further its own ends. There is absolutely no interest or agenda when it comes to, Welsh, Irish and English heritage and history. We've actually, they seem to just be, anonymous, random remains that only are useful for, gathering a bit of knowledge about, ancient practices. There's very, none of these things get preserved or put, restored. When they restore them, it's a bit sad, really. I think that a lot of the cremations were actually done later on, and because if you're going to cremate something and burn it, what is the point in preserving it? Because there's nothing left to preserve. What's the point in keeping ashes? You wouldn't collect ashes inside, chamber, because it's pointless. The only reason you would cremate something is to return it back into into the river or into the wind or whatever, if you were going to preserve it, you would want to preserve the whole thing, like when you get these full chariots, buried, or the actual bones, and then obviously the pyramids are the pinnacle of that because they went to the maximum standards of preservation. There's also many ancestors also wanted to study these things, study medicine and study body parts and study bones. So, they would have doctors and hospitals. That's the whole point. In fact, that's the whole point of, the Druids were studying, at least up to their standards, medicine and body parts and so forth. So, I probably exhausted what I wanted to say now, but I find this really interesting, this catacombs, cattle and combing and, burying up the ancestors and so forth. We don't know what other ancient sites were in Huddersfield. We've only got, Castle Hill and the one at Dalton, which is people have tried to pretend doesn't exist, which does, which I've been complaining about to the government quite a lot recently, which that definitely hasn't been ploughed out because it's impossible to plough it out. But I'm starting to wonder, if it did have some shaped sides to it, like Old Oswestry Hill Fort. I'm starting to wonder if that somehow got ploughed out, if they did plough it out or comb it out. But if you look at Maiden Castle, it's absolutely huge. I mean, it would be extremely difficult to plough that out, So there's a lot to think about there. That it could be one of the tools that they used, it's convenient for them to, do a bit of erasure. Can you remember the band Erasure? Do a bit of erasure. It does them a favour. They can do a bit of erasure as well as, ploughing some fields, planting some crops. It suits them fine to achieve both ends, and they could find some treasure and dig it up. But as for digging fresh tombs to put things in, that's interesting, if it's used in, all these places in, Rome and Italy and so forth, catacombs. If it's Germanic, that word, it's likely that it does come from probably, maybe it is more of an Anglo-Saxon sort of origin and combination. So I think, from a final point, if you've even not fallen asleep, I think that it definitely it gestures towards this kind of ploughing, but also has elements of finding, remains, but also you can plough out burials and so forth. So that's my kind of understanding now, I reckon, what I've come to. But whether or not it's with intent or not, that's the thing. I'm not a great fan of bread. I think that it's, that in the ironic thing with, the windmills and growing the bread and all that, and the whole, opium poppy culture, poppy cross flag adoption thing. I think that they said that was it King Charles I or Henry I think it was Henry I. I don't know, but there's a recent video on the Cambrian Chronicles, and he's saying that one of the kings, he was really he wanted to try and affiliate with the Welsh and with Welsh history, and he used the flag of Pendragon, which is that Carmarthen flag. So the King of England was actually using the Red Dragon flag for a time. That's what they were saying. Because I actually thought that, apparently Wales didn't have a flag, so they wanted to know which flag to have. It turns out that at some point, at least, they had one flag for that was actually the main flag. I only think that they adopted the current cross they've got now after the Crusades. I don't think they were using it. if I don't think they were using that cross before the Crusades, so they went over in the Crusades, and there's something to do with the whole. I don't know what happened over there, but it's something to do with opium and those poppies and farming and windmills for sure. Although, you know, Anglo-Saxons were meant to have windmills, weren't they, back then? That's pretty much all I've got to say about it, you know.